Today, I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Men's Room Show. For those of you who are new to our audience, we want you to know that the Men's Room Show was created as a space for men to feel safe expressing their emotions in a vulnerable way. It is a place where men can come to be seen, heard, and acknowledged without feeling judged or afraid to show sides of themselves that are different than society's expectations. We aim to educate, inspire, empower, and advocate. Please note that we are not licensed clinicians. We express views and opinions based on our individual experiences. Our stories are meant to inspire others and do not replace medical advice or professional guidance. And so, I am Linda Tilson, a men's empowerment advocate from a woman's perspective, and today I'm excited to have our special guest, Aaron Stone, joining us. He is a victim advocate and motivational speaker, and I'm going to add in there a retired U.S. Army personnel person. And really, today, Aaron is here to share his story, and we're going to have a lively discussion about the ways that men can navigate and, decide for themselves and define moral worth. So, Aaron, what better way to start it off than for you to jump right in with your story?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and having me today. And yes, with my story, basically, I grew up in North Carolina. I'm currently in El Paso now, retired out of Fort Bliss here, as you mentioned. And my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. And my mom was forced to raise three young kids on her own. Never saw my father again. He didn't provide any support, never talked to him. If I saw him on the street today, I wouldn't know who he was. But I always call him one of my greatest teachers because he taught me what not to do as a father. And thankfully, just down the street, my maternal grandparents, my mom's parents, lived there. So my grandfather took me in, and for all intents and purposes, he became my father. Raised me for several years, and then when I turned 13, sadly, he passed away. And then, of course, this left a hole in my heart. I'm still looking for that mentor, that male role model, that father figure. And it's not to say that my mom and grandmother weren't doing an excellent job raising us, they were. But I was just still looking for something to fill that void. And when I was 14, I got a job at a Chinese restaurant called the China Inn. I was a waiter, made a whopping $4 an hour plus tips, which back in 91, that was a lot of money, especially for someone who didn't have any, a lot growing up. And it was there that I met a teacher. He was a middle school teacher, Mr. Richard Pate. And he had a way of making kids gravitate towards him because he had, that aura about him. He showed a genuine interest, and he was always at the restaurant when I was working, usually on Friday and Saturdays. And even though he wasn't at my school, he was within the school system. And he just happened to frequent the restaurant. And through the next several weeks after I met him, during breaks or maybe even before or after work, we would just sit and talk because he showed a genuine interest in me. And I gravitated towards him pretty easily. We talk about everything from movies to books to music to the meaning of life. And throughout the year that I knew him, I would go to his house and I would literally sit in a chair, he'd sit in his, and we would just talk. Nothing inappropriate ever happened. Sometimes he'd take me to his back room, his own man cave, and show me the latest cassette or CD that he had. And he wasn't married. And looking back, on that now, I find, with a little more educated eyes, I find it odd that his likes and dislikes began to parallel that of a 14-year-old kid at the time. But I was just happy that someone was there for me, was being that mentor that, I was craving at the time. And I knew him for a year. And then in August of 92, 24 August 92 to be exact, I was 15 years old, about to start my sophomore year in high school. And I went to his house that morning, as I had done, hundreds of times before, previously that morning. And we were talking. He said, "Hey, I have something to show you in the back." And I was like, "Okay." So I've been there countless times. And that morning, I don't know if it was something that he planned or something that he saw an opportunity to take, but he raped me that morning. And I've heard countless survivor stories throughout my life. And one common factor that I've noticed is that many survivors do not remember the details of their attack. The brain shuts down as a way of protecting itself. And I bring that up because I remember every detail of that attack. I just couldn't tell you how long it was, but what I don't remember was afterwards when I stumbled out on this porch, obviously in the days it would just happened, how I got home afterwards. I got on my bicycle, and the next thing you know, I'm on my own front porch, and how I didn't hit a tree or a car didn't hit me, I don't know, but I did make it home safely. And obviously, I wanted nothing to do with him anymore. And a couple days later, I received a letter in the mail. This is back before email. I should put pen to paper and stamp on, and it was an apology letter. And even though the letter didn't state specifically about the attack, you could tell something inappropriate happened between this adult and this minor. I read it once, I threw it away, and a couple hours later, my mom approached me with this letter. She found it on top of the trash can. She was a behavioral health nurse for troubled teens, and so she knew something was going on. Her spidey senses were going off, and she asked me straight up, "Did he touch you inappropriately in a way?" And since that day, for over 18, almost 18 years, shame had been my number one motivator. And that day, shame forced me to tell my first lie to my mom. I said, no, he didn't touch me anyways, because growing up, in American society, American Southern society, we were taught that men do not show emotions. If another man lays his hands on you, if you can't protect yourself, how you can protect your family or those under your charge. And so I stuffed those emotions deep down inside, and I said, no, we simply got into an argument, and she didn't mention anything after that. It never came back up again. I was already pretty much an introverted kid to begin with, so this put me to my shell even more. But as life does, it went on. Um, I finished high school, did pretty well, received a scholarship, but I decided to, I need to do something else for a little bit. I'm tired of school. I'll go join the army for a few years and come back and figure out what to do from there. And those initial 4 years turned into 27. I retired last year, October 22, out of here in El Paso, and we're going to stay here until my daughter graduates high school in 2025. And in the late 90s, when I joined, seeking help at behavior health was a stigma. At that time, you were seen as a detriment to the force, you were seen as the weak link. So I was able to keep my personal and professional life very separate for a very long time. And, in the morning, standing tall outside, I'm that perfect soldier, but at night, in my barracks room, I'm still that kid that's trying to figure out and trying to process what happened to him years prior. But I refused to seek help. I didn't turn to drugs or alcohol, but what I did was my way of dealing was cutting. I'd cut my upper arms and legs. So when I wore shorts and t-shirt, you couldn't see. But it was my way of trying to get back that power that he still held over me. Because even though I had not seen him since that day, every day he held that sway over me, because he knew that being a pillar of the community, by the time I met him, he had been teaching for almost 3 decades. And who's going to believe this kid over, this man who is a pillar of the community, who's not only teaching the current population, but even their parents? And so he was well known. And so he still held that power over me even after I was an adult and moved on. And with Iraq and Afghanistan kicking off, I was a medic by trade. And so sad to say, war kept me busy. But whatever I witnessed in combat never bothered me as much as that morning of that rape, because we're trained to deal with death, with injuries, with suddenly losing people, but no one can be trained to deal with rape. Rape is chaos, rape is pain, rape is humiliation, and rape can take one's humanity to the point where it's almost impossible to get back. Which is why so many people hold it in, because they're ashamed of what happened to them. And that shame, as I mentioned, is a terrible motivator, but it motivates nonetheless. And even after the wars kicked off, with PTSD on the rise, seeking help at behavior health, the stigma was sort of breaking away. But you still had those senior leaders in there, that old school mentality, which included myself, who thought that seeking help was weak. Even though leaders tried to enforce that, hey, it's okay, I still refused to seek help. And fast forward to 2010, I'm married. I have my own daughter now. And I don't know, I was driving home from work one afternoon. I don't know if it was a sight, a sound, or a smell, but something had triggered my mind in such a way to cause me to have a nervous breakdown while driving. I began to shake and crawl uncontrollably, to the point where I had to pull over. And even at this point, my wife still had no idea what happened to me. Shame kept me from telling the person I was sharing my life with at the time that, this happened to me. She did not know. And I called her and I said, I can't do this anymore. This is what happened. And that next day, I'm enrolled in a behavior health inpatient program. And that very morning, even though I wasn't planning on saying a word, I told my story for the first time to a group of strangers, about 15 people. The counselor, Mar, was excellent, and he had me open up right away. And as cliche as it sounds, it was like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulder. I was finally taking that first step towards recovery. And this is 17 and a half years after the fact. Um, and I finished the program, was seeking help in therapy on a regular basis on medication. So every day I was taking that first step. And a couple months later, just out of curiosity, I was researching the statute of limitation for statutory rape in North Carolina, and it turns out that there was none. And even though I had no proof of what happened, this was over 17 years after the attack, it would be my word against his. I decided to call the local police and tell them what happened. And so I did. I gave them my story over the phone. They asked me, hey, can you come up, give us a written statement, and we'll take it from there. So I took a few days off. I went to North Carolina, gave them a written statement, and they said, well, if anything pops up, we'll let you know. Like I said, I wasn't expecting anything. I was happy. Hey, I took a first step towards, doing something, it made me feel like, hey. And 5 days later, I received a phone call, and he was sitting in the local county jail on a $500,000 secured bond for statutory rape and taking disabilities with a minor. It turned out that during their investigation, they had spoken to the former school superintendent, who was his boss, way back in '92, and they had access to his teaching file. And in that file was that letter that he wrote me. It turned out that after my mom approached me with it, she knew something was going on. So she went straight to the school board and said, hey, there's something inappropriate going on with this teacher and this minor. And they agreed that there was, and they called him to the carpet per se and gave him the option to retire quietly or be fired publicly. And he took the former, and the dates on that letter corroborated with the dates that I gave the police for the attack. And so that was enough evidence that they needed. And this woman, my mom, even though I had lied to her, she still went to bat for me and did not tell me whatsoever. This happened still way back in 1992, and she never mentioned a thing to me. And by the time I found out about this in 2010 during the investigation, she was already on the decline. She was diagnosed with early onset dementia. She has full-blown Alzheimer's now, so I'd never been able to thank her properly for what she did. But because of her bravery and for her standing up for me, we both were able to put this man behind bars and get him off the street. Um, we were preparing for trial. It never happened because he eventually pled out, and he died in 2013. But it's just amazing that even though I didn't think anything would come of it, just me making that phone call was able to put him off the street. And we were hoping that when we were preparing for trial that this was out in the news, in the papers and on TV, that after 30 years of teaching, that the odds of me being the only student that he molested or raped was pretty low. Um, Sadly, no one else stood up. No one said anything. So that either tells me a couple things. One, maybe I was the one unlucky one. But honestly, and I think that a lot of people agree that with as many years as he been around students, that I wasn't. And sadly, there's probably others out there suffering in silence as I did for so long. And that's why I speak now, to give others a voice, to give them the moral courage to speak up and say, yes, if this man in front of me can tell his story, can say, do not suffer as I did, then I've done my job, and that's all I want to do now. And since I retired from the military last year, this is what I do full time, is go out and speak. Colleges, universities, I still have my door in the military. In fact, I was just at Fort Liberty, North Carolina last couple weeks ago. And so I'm enjoying what I do. And as long as someone would be willing to hear, I'll be willing to talk.
Thank you for sharing that story. I knew a little bit about the background, but all of the threads that you shared that I was keeping mental note of. One, the courage to be able to come forward. And you had mentioned that this power was held over you, and that why would they believe you over an educator of stature. Just knowing that as part of your message now, after you've been through all of that, do you realize that you could have possibly came forward at that time and actually had more power, but because of society, because of where we were, it took many years of society changing where you could bring that to the attention of authority? And I am shocked that that letter was kept in the file. I wasn't shocked about what your mother did, because kids will tell you
Yes.
things and you will go to bat, and
Yes.
she probably spared you from actually saying that she went to the school, because as a young man, if you found out your mom went to school to go to bat for you, that probably wouldn't have set well with you. And so
You're right.
she did
Yes.
what she could, and she went behind the scenes. And that's amazing that that letter survived, and that your story was more than that typical, oh, we'll put it in the file, never to be heard of again. They did investigate, and to go back and have that happen, and to have the former principal be a part of that resolution, this shows that our voices do matter. And while we might not be able to speak up in the moment, you were able to find that place. And it sounds like to me the reason why you're telling this story is to empower people to speak up in that moment, because you do have more power than you think, and not to give up, to keep sharing with authorities or people that can help you. Your parents, you might have, knowing what you know now, you and your mom might have had a different conversation. And so everything that you have gone through and bring to these conversations in the spaces that you're invited to, you're doing everything that society can value from, because while you may have been the only one, you were thinking chances are probably not. And I think there's probably more people that didn't come forward for this, many of the same reasons that you share. And really what all of this is like also showing is that really sometimes you're going to have to get real brave, but at the end of the day, you do what's right. You do what's right, and you take it forward. And it could have come at different costs. Yours, you got a judgment day. Your person that hurt you is no longer here. And so all of these things, and I guess I'm wondering, and I'm trying to figure out how do I want to like frame this, because you already answered my first question is, can you share a personal experience where you had to make a moral decision? How did you approach it? Textbook case there. Your experience was that lived way to approach it. And so really, also, what I wanted to get into is, how you balance your personal autonomy with ethical responsibilities, and be able to choose to take a certain path that could have direct impact on others, both positive and negative. So how does a person like approach that? If you want to go a little deeper into that for me.
Yeah, well, especially when we deal with morals and ethics. I mean, we always, everybody says that they're going to do the hard right over the easy wrong. And, sometimes we want to find that shortcut. And of course, that's where that ethical fading can kick in, because you got away with just a little bit this time. And then it's like, I'm going to do a little more. And, in the military, there's senior leaders that get in trouble for the stupidest things all the time. And more times than not, it's not just because they had decided to do something at that time. It's just because throughout the years, they simply weren't caught.
Mm-hmm.
And I started speaking in the military several years ago because just like in colleges, universities, and the civilian world, sexual assault and harassment has been in the forefront. And anytime there was literature passed out or survivors speaking, it was always a female, because as you know, our societal biases go towards rape as male on female. And in the military, even though the number of reports percentage wise are higher with female, the actual raw number of attacks are male just because there's just more of us. It's a numbers game. And it's through not only, just encounters at night at a bar or whatever, it's initiations and hazings that still goes on that we see in college and university all the time. Just down the road from me in El Paso in New Mexico State University this year had issues with their basketball team with the locker room sexual harassment assaults that were going on there. And so this is what we're still seeing. And, we always, especially when, we have 18, 17, 19-year-old kids that are leaving home for the first time, we expect to inoculate a specific culture into them, but you're not going to take away 18 years of upbringing. If they are taught that this is okay to, to say this to someone or to have this behavior or touch someone inappropriately in this way, then that's what they're going to carry with them. And just expecting that a few months of training is going to take that away, it's not possible. And so we need to teach that it's okay to speak up, that it's okay to say something without retribution, without being ostracized, because we see even on the news, the last several years, we have sexual assault survivors stand up against national politicians about attacks that happened decades ago. And what do we do as a society? We victim blame. Why were you wearing this dress? Or why were you at this bar? Or why were you drinking? Instead of believing, we knock them down. And this sets a precedence for everyone else who wants to stand up and do the right thing because they see that, well, this person tried to stand up and say something and their livelihood was destroyed. And I don't want that to happen to me. So they sit down, they stay within society's expectations of just shutting up in color. So they're stuck in that status quo. And there's a quote that I use in my talk by Mark Twain, and it still holds true to this day. It says, it's curious that physical courage to be so common in the world and moral courage so rare. Because when it comes to putting our bodies in danger, we don't think about it. You see that fireman running inside the building or that soldier running across the battlefield. When it comes to standing up and saying, what's happening now isn't right, this needs to change, it's hard because people are viewed in that way as rocking the boat, as trying to change the status quo, as trying to make a name for themselves. And more times than not, they're not even recognized for their courage until decades later. And so if going out and speaking gives someone the moral courage to stand up and say, this is not right, this happened to me, or I see this going on in my organization, I'm going to put a stop to it now, because the organizations need to have that climate of culture of allowing people to speak up, of allowing them to say what's on their mind without fear of retribution or being ostracized from the organization.
Thank you so much for touching upon that, moving it to that organization's culture. And you do find that people, when they either witness or see or experience in some way something that's not right, that a lot of times people go into looking the other way. Somebody else will say something, and the moment when that moral courage can come to the forefront and someone says what needs to be said and shuts it down and becomes that voice, even if it's maybe stepping in to be that voice for someone that they're just not ready to do that, it's no longer sitting quiet and expecting something different to happen. And the moment a person can do that, you're absolutely right. It allows other people to see that, oh, that person spoke up. Oh, they actually made a difference. And then they're not operating out of fear of the retribution, retaliation that can happen. And so when that can happen, that is extremely powerful. Once a person experiences that event where they can speak up and have good become of it and no longer have the opposite happen, which is what we see a lot in society, as you've touched upon, the better off we are for moving in that positive forward thinking direction, which is much healthier. And doing the right thing, it's hard, but the benefit of doing so is enormous.
It is. And I mentioned the ethical fading earlier, and you see this example with predators, they may say something light, such as an inappropriate joke. It's like, okay, well, I was able to get away with this. What can I do now? So it may be coming, okay, well, I'm going to touch you here or touch you there. That person doesn't say anything. I can push the boundary a little further. And so it's about seeing, okay, how much can I do? Where the boundaries are? And once those boundaries are set, how can I push those? And, like you said, once someone stands up and said, hey, this isn't right, it shuts it down. It sets the example for everyone else. And that spreads. That positivity can spread just as fast as negative can, because, if one person walks past, a standard being broken, the new standard is set. And once someone sees that, that spreads like a cancer throughout the organization. So it's all about, you know, keeping that hard right over that easy wrong, as hard as it can be at times. It's going to set, a better example for others to follow.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm just really loving the story that you shared, and where we're going. And, the one area that I wanted to do, because it is the men's room show, is I wanted you to share with us what advice you would share with another man who's being challenged to uphold his moral worth. What would you say to him?
That in the end, you're going to be the one that's right. Stick by your convictions, stick by your values and beliefs. And as long as what you're fighting for is for the progression of everyone, then it's going to be hard. People are going to stand up against you. People are going to blame you for trying to change things, because it's the way it's always been. I mean, every generation always complains about the current, the newer generations. It's our God-given right, it seems. And I mentioned this also with a quote. I also have another one from Socrates, who also said, something 2,400 years ago. He said that the current generation is lazy. They don't want to work. They just want things to happen for them. And we still say that today. And we are, as adults, we're afraid of change. And we blame change as people trying to go against the status quo, when we're trying to make things better for the next generation. If you're complaining about the current just because they have it easier, that's the way it should be. 100 years ago, my grandfather's grandfather was pushing a horse and a plow through a field, but I bet he would have loved to have had a tractor or something mechanical at the time. But because we advance and he sees that his own grandson is having it easier, he's going to complain about, well, if I had it harder. Well, that's good. We want to make things easier for the current, and that includes the right not to be sexually assaulted, molested, or harassed. And I bring up a story of a Vietnam soldier back in 1968. In Vietnam, there was an infantry organization that was slaughtering civilians in the village of My Lai. Their only crime that morning was waking up, but that unit had had enough throughout weeks and months of tragedies with casualties and deaths. And they simply went out and just started killing every man, woman, child, animal. If it breathed, it died. And during that situation, there was a helicopter pilot flying above, Hugh Thompson, who saw that, hey, these people do not have weapons, yet they're being gunned down. And he saw a group of soldiers chasing civilians and decided to land his helicopter between the two groups. He had his crew point the weapons at the soldiers that were chasing civilians, so them stand down. They rescued the civilians, only 6 or 7. It wasn't a lot out of the 500 or so that were killed. But when word got out about this, he wasn't held as a hero. He was ostracized. His career was almost ruined. To the top of the government at that time, even the president, Nixon at the time, was putting this man down. This is the fog of war. This is what happens. And he stood with his convictions. He stood up against those in power. He was able to finish his career. And it wasn't until 1998, 30 years later, that he was finally recognized for his moral courage. And it is hard to fathom now that, wow, I can't believe they thought that way at that time. But it also makes me wonder, what are we doing now that a generations 50 years from now say, I can't believe that they did this, and how we're thinking. And that's why change is good. Stick with your convictions, stand your ground, don't let them knock you down. It's going to hurt, but eventually you will come out on the other side. You're going to be scathed, but you're going to make the world a better place because of that. And that's how change happens.
Absolutely. That is how change happens. And I appreciate what you said about how, we need to look at when a generation that comes in the future has it easier, that's the ideal state. Because, if you look at the different types of generational differences, you go back to the baby boomers, for example, it's always like this thought that I work hard. If I work hard, I get the promotion. If I get the promotion, I get to have these great things. And there's this tendency that I observe, other people have observed, that all the other people that come after them need to do the same thing in order to be in that place. And so what you're saying is converse to that. Recognize that it was hard, but let's make it easier. Let's not make everyone have to go through all of the same gates and checkpoints to arrive at this place where it's easier. That should be the ideal and goal that we're communicating and advocating for.
Exactly. I'm Generation X. We're latchkey kids.
Yes, we are.
I remember in the 80s, there were commercials on at 10 at night asking our parents if they know where their children are, because we were literally all over the place. There were no cell phones at the time. We'd leave in the morning because they'd kick us out, and we wouldn't come home till the street lights came on. And I'm definitely not against hard work. I've worked hard my whole life, but I'm not working towards a life that my grandfather wanted or even my mother wanted. I wanted something better. And with my daughter now, I'm making sure that she had a better life than that, because that's what we want. We don't want them to suffer as we did. We want them to have that better life. It's good to go through trials and tribulations. That's going to happen no matter what kind of life you live. But, to complain that they have it easier, or that, they're not, doesn't seem like they're working as hard for the same things that we want, that's asinine, because we want life to be better for the future generations. And if they don't have to suffer needlessly, then that's awesome. Then I've done my job as an adult, as a citizen who, tries to make society my part of the pie just a little bit better.
Yes. And as we're thinking about, education of future generations, education of our kids, I'm thinking that, a lot of times in the schools, they've talked about, not doing drugs. They talk about, sexual education. They talk about the things to do if you're assaulted or a victim of a sexual crime. And what they don't emphasize enough is the prevention piece, which you touched upon, and I'm a real advocate for, is about speaking your truth, setting and communicating boundaries, and knowing that you actually have more power than you might be feeling that you have in that moment when you're in the presence of someone of authority. We always think that when we're in the presence of someone of authority, that they hold all of the cards, that they will have the final say and decision, when really we speak up and set that boundary. We say, that is not okay for you to talk to me like this. It will shut it down. But it's hard thinking that we could actually do that. And I'd like to see young people, or even people now, get into a space where they can have those conversations in a safe, protected environment, where they can feel what that's like to say those words with someone sitting in front of them, and see that it does change the dynamics. Because, if in growing up, you're only going to be exposed to your own lived experience. And then if your parents maybe weren't forthcoming, or you were in a school that wasn't forthcoming with how you would speak up, well, then that's what repeats generation after generation after generation. So it's people like you, it's people like me that take our experiences, and we become advocates so that we can change that trajectory, so we can make it easier for people that are coming after us.
Right. And it's all about gaining new perspective and taking in the perceptions and perspectives of others. I think, me being in the military for so long, I was lucky in that I was able to see the world and experience new cultures and perspectives. And what was really eye-awakening for me is, growing up, I thought that we were poor, and we were to American standards, but I didn't think it'd be any worse. And then when I was 19 years old, I was in Honduras for 7 months, and we would provide medical coverage to local villages. We would, travel to the mountains, and there'll be a vet, there'll be some nurses, a doc, a dentist, and these villagers. The vet was always the longest line, because they were more concerned about taking care of their livelihood, which was their livestock, instead of themselves. And just walking around the village and seeing that most of them slept on the floor or in a hammock. They had no doors or windows. Animals were walking freely wherever, and it would be pretty common to see a young girl, 13 or 14, with a baby or two already. And that was eye-opening for me. And that you just don't know how bad you have it until you see the other side and you realize that, we always say that, someone here or there is starving, but when you see it with your own eyes, it does a little awakening in you, and it makes you realize that there are people in the world that have it so much worse. But so what can I do to make it better? And that's all we're trying to do. Because I always, I like to talk, especially when I go back home to North Carolina. In fact, I was just there when I went to speak. It was only an hour from my hometown, so I went to see my mother. And you have people that have grown up in the same town for generations, and most of them do not even leave the country more. And so all they know is what's there, so what's in their box, and that's their world, and that's fine, that's all they know. But it's being able to have that advantage to travel and to see other, just because I always like to say we have our cultural onion, and your values, actions, and beliefs, your first 5 or 6 years is going to be what your parents have, because that's who's raising you. If they have this religion and they like this football team, you like it simply because they do. It's just a matter of luck of where you were born. And then you finally start to, you go to school and you meet other people, and you start taking in, other perceptions and cultures, and you discard some things that you don't like about your own and take in, but more than likely your foundation's not going to change. It's going to be where it is. And sometimes, like what happened to me, it takes, sadly, a life transformative event such as my sexual assault to change my foundation and make me think, you know what, this isn't right. I need to do something about this. And that's why I continue to advocate, and why you continue to do so, because, we want to see the world change for the better.
Definitely want to see the change for the better. And, as advocates, if we can grow more advocates, the more that we can spread that message. And before we close on today's episode, I wanted you to be able to have the platform, the voice today to share the work that you're doing, and any project that's coming up, how people could get in touch with you if they would like to share a little bit about something that they've gone through as far as their journey, and where they could seek support. I think that's really important that people know of where they can find that.
Yes, I have a website. It is 18 Winters. The actual number is 18 Winters. I came up with the name 18 Winters because that's how long I suffered in silence before I finally spoke up. It was over 17 and a half years before I finally said something. And in that time span, 18 cold, dark, long winters had passed. And so that is the name of my organization. I can be contacted through the website there. There's a contact form on there, or I can be reached directly at aaronstone@18winters.com. And I answer my emails promptly. I never avoid. Basically, I work from home now, and this is what I do. If I'm not on the road, I'm reaching out to, to organizations saying, hey, I'd be more than happy to speak, to spread the word. And if I'm speaking to 5 people or 500, I will show. I don't care. I just want to speak. And I'm a realist. I know that, especially when I'm speaking to a large organization, that 95% of that room is going to walk out and never remember what I said. But it's that 5% that reaches out to me, that speaks to me afterwards, that sends a message that says, you have changed my life. And that's what I am doing. And that's why I continue to do that. Nothing makes me happier than to receive a message, months down the road saying, hey, I saw you speak last year. I was able to overcome my demons, to speak up and to seek help, and you inspired me to do that. And that's the reason why I do it. That is it. And as long as I'm continuing helping that one person, I will keep doing what I do.
Yes, keep doing what you're doing and help that 5%. You're right. Being able to do that is why we do this work. And what I'd like to do now as we close out our show is, if you are listening to us today and you would like to come and be a voice on the Men's Room Show, or someone that would make a great guest, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you so that we can provide the space for you to have the opportunity, just like Aaron and I have today, to affect that 5% or more, to have that impact. And we invite and encourage you to subscribe to the Men's Room Show on YouTube. And we also have a support group that is out on Facebook. And so I'll be leaving Aaron's website and how you can get a hold of him, and then the information about becoming a subscriber or guest on our show. And so with that, we'll see you on the next edition of the Men's Room in 2024.